Does Nicci Gerrard do her novels? Do have any influence on the books by Nicci French? I mean, how does it work for you in your mind?
It's very hard. It's rather hard even to speak about. I mean, Nicci French, Nicci Gerrard. It seemed a rather strange thing to be sitting here talking about them as if they're two people, but they are.
Schizophrenia.
They are certainly. It is like having. It's a very lucky position to be in as a writer. Not just to have one voice, but to have two voices, which I can inhabit. And move between the two. And they don't I don't think they interfere with each other, but you say, do they influence each other? And kind of course they do. I think, of course. But in a way, I hope, in a kind of good and fruitful way. I mean, I hope, there are some writers, for instance, who don't read fiction when they're writing fiction because they don't want to be influenced. Whereas I think that myself or Sean as well, we're completely different from that. We will read as much as we can because you're always going to be influenced, so you might as well take in as many influences as you can. And of course, thoughts and feelings and experiences I have while I'm writing my own novels will, of course, I hope, help me while I'm writing Nicci French novels. And the same with Sean, who's also engaged in his own kind of solo writing project. But having said that, it still remains, Nicci French is still this strange and separate voice which we can only make together. I couldn't write as Nicci French on my own.
No.
I just couldn't do it. No. It's not. It's a shared kind of creation. If Sean died, I don't want to say that. If Sean died, I wouldn't. That would be the end of Nicci French.
Yes. The reason the question came up is, like, suspense has a role in the middle place.
It does.
You're confronted with Marnie, who gets a telephone call. Your friend is dying, and at that moment, but also further in the story, there are moments like it's a.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Because so much questions, because Marnie is so unsure about the whole thing, about in first instantation with what's going on here, and.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I suppose one of the things that kind of Nicci French and Nicci Gerrard have in common, and one of the things that Sean and I talk about a lot, is the kind of possibility of change. How possible is it in one's life to change? And usually it's very hard to change, and people kind of, all the resolutions I've made, which I make every year on New Year's Day, because I never keep them, because I keep wanting to change and I can't manage to, behaviour. Is very set and character, but there are moments in one's life where the kind of surface breaks and you can have kind of glimpses into yourself, and you see this kind of big landscape of yourself which you don't usually have access to, and those are moments where you make discoveries about yourself, and your kind of life becomes a kind of journey which is exciting. And I think that I'm interested in that, in my own writing, and certainly so is Nicci French. The triggers and the things that give you glimpses into what lies under the surface. I mean, one of the things that Sean and I talk about a lot is that, when people talk about normality, normal people, normal behaviour, what does that mean? I don't understand. Clearly, it kind of does and it doesn't. Everyone goes around presenting their kind of controlled, respectable surfaces to the world, and then every so often you kind of see what lies beneath, and what lies beneath all of our surfaces is this great roiling mass of dark, strange, inadmissible feelings. And I suppose you could say that both these voices are, both Nicci French and Nicci Gerrard. Sorry, Nicci French would be interested in that, and but also suspense.
So there are similarities.
There are similarities. Yes. Also, if I think about one of the reasons that Sean and I love writing psychological thrillers together is because a thriller seems a very wonderful way of exploring kind of everyday, ordinary, big emotions. The way we feel jealous or sad or lonely. The thriller form is a very good way of exploring that, because life is quite like a thriller. You don't really know what's going to happen. You're full, in a way, suspense is in life. I think it's very hard to get away from. I would find it very hard to write a novel with no suspense. I find days are terrifying. Getting through, if I think about a year in the life of our family, it's full of uncertainty and anxiety and things going wrong and not knowing and the plot going astray, and come round to breakfast anytime, you know, it's
Yeah.
life is a bit like a suspense anyway.
Yeah. Speaking of great novels, what writers are your great examples? We once talked about Dostoevsky.
Well, Dostoevsky would be one. If I think of great examples, I mean, what are them I read? The thing is, there are lots of novels I read and reread. So I suppose those are the ones I talk about. I read and reread a lot. I read Dickens at the moment. I have nothing. Dickens is a writer who I could never write like. He's just the most extraordinary, vivid, funny, sentimental, kind of maddening writer. But he's got a voice like nobody else. Philip Roth, I adore. Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, I read kind of once a year.
Okay, so you're revisiting those novels.
I reread. And actually, the older I get, the more I reread novels. I reread Nabokov a lot. To my great pride, I reread Proust. I've read Proust 3 times now. So that takes a long time.
Yeah, of course.
And then I have writers who I just...
Unique, I suppose. For the 4th time now.
Third time.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a lie. I've read it twice and I'm beginning it for the 3rd time. So I'm hoping that you know, by the time people listen to it, and then there are some writers that I just completely just love. I love, for instance, I love the children's books by Tove Jansson, who's a Swedish-Finnish children's writer. And I reread her. I think she's the most beautiful, kind of mystical writer. There's a British writer.
You read her in your childhood?
I read her in my childhood.
Okay.
And I read her and loved her, but I didn't realise how mad and wonderful the books were. They're completely odd little gems. And then I read them with Sean out loud to the children. And we cried as we read and passed them back and forward, weeping to each other. She's very emotional, beautiful writer. There's a writer called Penelope Fitzgerald, who I didn't discover till quite late. She didn't start writing until she was maybe in her 40s. And she's written several very, very uncanny, beautiful novels. So there are kind of discoveries like that I come across.
Yes.
But actually, I mean, I just read a lot. I think, you know, quite a lot, Sean and I get readers writing to us saying, what advice would you give if I want to be a writer? And really, there's only 2 things you can say. And the first thing is read. Just read and read and read. And the second thing is write. You know, there's never a right time to start writing. There's always a wrong time. There's always more research you can do. There's always going to be time later, you know, but you just have to begin now, really.
Yes.
And one of the things about, you know, I think a lot of the thing about reading is you have to find your own voice. And peculiarly, I think you find your own voice by reading lots and lots and lots of other voices. And somehow that helps you find your own voice.
Yes. Finally, a question about the middle place again, which is, by the way, translated as het Weerzien. Ralph has been living in Amsterdam.
Yes.
For some time before he gets ill and comes back to the UK. Double question. Is there any particular reason that is the case? And can you describe what Amsterdam means for you? And
well,
more broader.
I'll take that in 2 parts. The reason that Ralph is living in Amsterdam is I wanted him to live in Amsterdam because often when I think about a place where I'd like to live, if I didn't live where I live now, I often think of Amsterdam, which probably brings me to the second bit of your question. You know, Amsterdam for Sean and I, and for me, it's been quite like a kind of second writer's home. You know, it's where Nicci French is first published and where I'm first published. It's where we and I have kind of intentionally kind of loyal and really lovely readers. So it is that sense of it being like my other writer's home, which is why I sent Ralph there, even though he does a very happy character, but it was a nice place to send him for a bit. Okay.
You could sense he would be home there for...
Some kind of home for a lonely man.
Yeah, for a lost and lonely man, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.